This video is sponsored by NordVPN, which allows you to access the internet from a choice of 5,472 different servers across 59 different countries. This will let you bypass filters that the region in which you live has in place. For instance, if you have a streaming service like Netflix, it will only show you a fraction of its content, depending on which country you're viewing it from. Fawlty Towers, excellent show, is only available from the UK. Using NordVPN, you can change the country it thinks you're from. So if you're not from the UK, changing your country to there in NordVPN will open Fawlty Towers up for you to access. NordVPN allows you to bypass blocks like these by tunneling your internet traffic through different servers with different IPs, making it more difficult for your activity to be tracked. This also provides a number of security and anonymity benefits to your online travels. Get 68% off the 2-year plan and 4 months free by using the code CLICKS. Links in this video's description. There comes a time in everyone's life when they tire of searching for tiny differences in the same Valve-made maps over and over and over again. But that hasn't happened to me just yet, so let's investigate the many small, unannounced changes that have been rolled out across CSGO's main maps this year. A few of you noticed changes to the light positions on Overpass, but there have been other changes to other maps as well. What's going on? Why are these changes taking place now? And why aren't Valve telling us about it? What was announced was the new retake mode, which required new invisible blocks and commands to be embedded within these map files to inform the game mode on how to operate in this new retake mode. So that's why new versions have rolled out for all of these maps. But for many of them, it's been months since they were last updated. Perhaps not as long ago as you might have expected. Most were updated back in June to help improve visibility with some of the new player models in the game, with Vertigo being the map updated longest ago. And even that was only back in April of this year. But since then, somebody at Valve has continued to update the map files for them to remedy small problems or graphical glitches that they've discovered. It's just that these changes weren't big enough to justify updating the maps for these reasons, which is why we're only seeing these small changes thanks to the retake mode requiring these maps were updated. I suspect most of these changes have been forgotten even by the mapper who added them, so if I don't spot them in this video then maybe nobody ever will. Which makes you wonder if it was even worth making these changes in the first place, doesn't it? So we might as well start with Overpass. Yes, the lights here have moved. They've gone from being low down on one side to higher up on the other. I suspect this change was made to reduce the issues with smoke grenades. Players running in front of these lights would block their flare through the smokes, giving away their position. An unintended consequence of this change is that it's made the corner here just a tad darker and less reflective. I also noticed a new clip brush on the Trucker A, which will smooth out movement a bit for players stood on the top of this raised bit. And aside from that, I just saw tiny changes to the lighting in certain places, and some of the props appear to have tilted slightly. I passed these sort of things off as being the mapping equivalent of rounding errors. Like, okay, they're not exactly the same, but they're close enough to how they were that I don't care. Let's move on to Train now. And speaking of rounding errors, Train is the most boring map of them all. And for these kinds of updates too. One reflection looked a bit different than this tower at A, but aside from that, it was an hour of my life wasted. On to Inferno now, and this map didn't really get any changes at all, but everywhere I looked, reflections looked a little bit different. For some reason, the reflections on the newest version of the map aren't as dark as in the older version. I took close-ups of the most reflective bits of the map that I could find. And aside from discovering how much this game's low-res reflections could benefit from Source 2's improved and parallax corrected ones, I also discovered that the new reflections are actually closer to how they should be than the old ones were. It was quite difficult to figure out what the dark blobs were in the older versions, but I'm pretty sure they're from these textures that are overlaid over the base ground ones. In the older version of the map they appeared almost black, or missing even. So in this respect, the newer version of Inferno has better reflections than it used to. But it would still benefit greatly from Source 2. Speaking of reflections, what's going on in the pond at B? Valve, please fix. In the older version, the sky was blue, and in the newer version, more yellowy, perhaps because it's reflecting the clouds in the 3D skybox properly. But both versions are wrong, since certain things are see-through that shouldn't be. This door is rendered completely invisible. In fact, all props are. It makes the archways look really sad. Don't worry, you can't use this to see players who should be hidden behind stuff, since the player models aren't reflected at all. This puts the reflection quality somewhere behind Counter-Strike Sources from 2004. But it took until this video to notice. On to Mirage now, and fun fact, did you know that this map is the only one not to have any grenade clips? These are used in other maps on rough surfaces to make grenades bounce off them in a more predictable way, but maybe Valve doesn't care about updating this version of Mirage for whatever reason. Still, less work for me to do. I found no interesting updates in this map other than slightly different brightnesses on some of the floors and walls surrounding the brightest, dustiest regions of the map. It looks like there's now ambient occlusion behind this rug on the wall just here. This plant here is lit more brightly, though whether it was better now or before is anyone's guess. And all around the map, props vibrated slightly. Like I said, these might as well be rounding errors. Nuke is an interesting one. Well, interesting compared to the rest of this video so far. See this valve? Run down the slope, and now you don't. This has been updated so that it no longer fades out. Now, it's not like this fade out would have been distracting. I've tested it from various angles and its fade is safely concealed, out of view as you descend these steps. Unless you jump, then you'll see everything pop in and out of view. Valve, please fix Valve. The only reason I can see for this change taking place is because this valve obstructs vision a bit for players stood here, so anybody boosted on a player's head down here would have a tiny advantage over them in this one specific instance. But then this has been balanced out by this supporting bit fading out from here, which didn't used to happen. Exciting stuff indeed. What's probably more noticeable to this map is the change in lighting. This map was compiled a few days later than the rest of the Valve maps were back in June, and whoever did it must have used different settings because the lighting on the props is significantly different between these two versions. There are places where the older one's better and others where the newer one is, but both have problems, and where different props connect to each other can range from looking okay to being painfully obvious. Source 2 please. My analysis of grenade clipping finally paid off with Vertigo. I discovered this added clip rush just here on the rebar. This will make grenades bouncing off them behave more consistently for setup throws and the like. And any fences with that red netting now have none. I assume this was done to improve visibility with characters stood just in front and behind it, since I guess character models can look more like red netting than they can a distant skyscraper. And last, we get onto Dust 2, and I've saved the best till last. But funnily enough, this was the map I started the testing with, and then I got all excited when I thought the other maps were going to be just as interesting, which clearly didn't happen. Here's what I found on Dust 2. Boxes have been given a new texture layer with printed paint stuff on them. This hasn't been added to all of them, but the notable additions are to the ones on A site just here, and the ones in long doors, which cleverly point the way players should go, and hint to the possible boost you can do to get on top of them here. Lighting on these grass props has been changed significantly, making them appear darker and blending in with their surroundings a lot better. Same with the thatched roof on the top of the towers at B. But I think this is one area that looks significantly worse in the latest version. The trim on the cars has been made a lot more reflective than it was before, which increases the contrast between it and players stood behind them. Something has gone on with the roof between mid and outside tunnel. I think Valve must have tried to optimize it by adding a hint brush and possibly by repositioning or removing some of the satellite dishes. But it's definitely changed, and you can still see visual problems when stood in this corner here. Long A has become a bit less optimized, with grass now visible that previously faded out, and the same with these electrical boxes on the wall just here. And now onto the most exciting bit. Do you see it? I'll give you a few seconds. Yes, something is going on behind this palm tree. But what is it? Valve has decided to fade this window prop out from a shorter distance than before, thinking it's hidden enough from view that people won't notice. But I have noticed. And you will too, especially if stood in this position, which allows you to see through this house and into short A. I don't think you can see players through here. They pass quite a bit below it and probably aren't drawn anyway. But still, it's a glaring oversight. Valve, please fix. This sort of video is a risk. Valve did not announce any changes to these maps. I invested many hours taking over 1,000 comparison shots in search of the tiniest of changes. It could have been that I wasted several days of my life and didn't even get anything to show for it. But luckily for me, this time there were changes to be found. Small changes, but changes. And if nothing else, it's shown me that Valve does care about these maps. They do load them up and tweak them ever so slightly, every time a bug is discovered, or every time they find something that they think they could improve upon. Sometimes they get it disastrously wrong, but I commend the effort.